Welcome to the Flex Rental Solutions webinar. Today we're going to be looking at some tips and tricks for container and package building. We're more specifically going to be looking at the container inventory types that you can set up. So something like a shipping case, whether that be like a Pelican or a road case or something like that. That's going to be a little bit more of our focus today. The example that I want to share is a lighting fixture and the case that it comes in. And so just really quick, this is kind of a new system that I'm working in, and I haven't built a lot of my inventory yet. So just really quickly, I just want to create a couple of dummy items. So maybe we'll just say this is a VL 2500 wash. I won't bother with all of the other details at this point. I just want to get an inventory item in the system. And we're going to say that it's a serialized model. And I'll just say that we are adding 4 serial units. So I have 4 of these lights, each with their own barcode. What I want to do now is set up an item for the shipping case that these lights would come in. Now, one tip that I usually like to give people is, I guess it depends on how you want to organize your shipping cases and your inventory. So for example, here I have a shipping cases folder that's just there by itself, but I see a lot of people that might say underneath each main category, they might have a cases folder under each one. And so for example, I might say in audio, I'm going to go to my inventory group manager. And if you don't know, that's just a right click on the inventory group. Then say add new child group. And I could say these are audio cases. Give it an icon. Let's choose that one. And so now I have a cases folder for just audio cases. And I could do the same for video. And now let's do the same for lighting. Now there isn't necessarily a wrong or right way to do this. I just kind of like having the organization a little bit better by having each of your cases fall within their own respective categories. And so you can either do it this way where you have a specific cases folder here, or just an entire shipping cases parent inventory group. For those of you who use auto sort mode, when you're dragging and dropping things from these different folders, if I put the case itself onto a quote, then it would default to the lighting subtotal because it always defaults to the parent subtotal. But if I had it in a shipping cases parent folder, then it would default to a shipping cases subtotal on the quote. So just a few things to think about as you consider how you set that up. I'm going to go with the method of putting the cases into these separate folders underneath each parent category. So under lighting cases, I'll right click and say new inventory item. And that's going to give me a new item in the primary group of lighting cases. And we're just going to say that this is a VL 2500 shipping case. We can call it whatever we want, maybe a shipping case times 2 or something to designate that it holds 2, but you can call that whatever you want. The important thing is that for the preset, we're going to set this as serialized storage. And there are some subtle differences between serialized storage and a serialized package. We're not going to go too much into this during this webinar. We have some other webinars on each of those topics. I think we have a very specific dedicated webinar just to serialized storage and another one just to serialized packages. So we're not going to cover that too much here. This webinar is more meant to just show a few tips and tricks and things that I've learned over my years of using Flex, and also a few things that we've found as we do some on-site trainings with customers in ways that they've been utilizing the system. So we're just going to call this serialized storage. And I'll explain a little bit about what serialized storage is. But if you want to get into a lot more detail, then go ahead and watch the other webinars about serialized storage. The first thing that I want to do is add a couple serial units. Because this item's serialized, that means that each case that I own can have its own barcode. So let's say because I have 4 of these wash lights, maybe I have 2 cases because it's 2 per case. So these are the unique barcodes that I would put onto each case. One other thing that we'll see in the inventory model section here is a storage requirements. This is where I'm going to put what needs to go inside of each of these cases for it to be a complete case. And we'll see where this comes into play in just a minute when we enter the content builder mode for one of these barcodes. But for now, what I want to do is just put the required contents for this case. So it needs 2 VL2500 wash. And notice that I'm just dragging the inventory model in. I'm not putting any specific of these VL2500 wash lights in. I'm not putting in one of these barcodes. I'm just saying that this case needs 2 of these. It doesn't matter which 2, it just needs 2 of them. I might also come in here and say that it needs maybe a safety cable, clamps, whatever else might go into this case with the wash light. And I don't think I have any of that set up, so let's just really quick right-click Inventory Group Manager and add a new child group that we'll call Accessories. And in the Accessories folder, we could put a new inventory item. And let's just call this a lighting safety cable. Again, I'm not going to fill in all of the details right now. I typically do recommend doing that when you're setting up your inventory. Fill in as much as you possibly can, because down the road you'll find that there are a lot of nice features you can use with the information that you put into the sections as you're creating a new inventory model. This one we'll say is non-serialized. And so we're not adding unique barcodes for each unit. All we're saying is that we own a generic quantity. So maybe I have 20. The first number is how many is actually sitting in my warehouse, and the second number is how many do I own in total. So that first number will go up and down as I scan things in and out. And if I put this into these storage requirements, let's refresh that. I'll say maybe I need 2 or 4 of these to go in there. Nothing really happens to the quantity of those lighting safety cables. Again, that's just because in that storage requirements tab, I'm just telling Flex what is supposed to go in there. If we actually go and open one of these cases, this is where we're going to see the storage requirements and how many we actually have inside of this case right now out of what's supposed to be in there. So right now we can see we have 0 out of the required 2 for the wash and 0 out of the required 4. And so that's one big tip that I always like to share with people. And I'm surprised that more of our customers aren't taking advantage of these storage requirements because that can be really helpful for you when you open a serialized storage barcode. You can see exactly what's supposed to be inside there. A lot of people normally would do this with like just a piece of paper printed on the inside of the case. And you could still do that, but this is a really nice way for you to verify within Flex that you have everything that's supposed to go in there. Also notice that it is red up on the top here. That just means that this is an incomplete container. Now if I scan some lights into that, and let's choose barcode 00308 and 309. Normally I would actually have the lights sitting in front of me. I would scan them with a barcode scanner, but since I don't have that set up right now, I'm just going to hand type those barcodes in. And so you can see I have the required amount for the wash lights, and it shows me which ones I scanned into this case. And then I could either scan the non-serialized barcode or just double click on the safety cables, and it will ask if I want to do a virtual scan, and I'll just say yes, and then enter the quantity that I'm adding. Notice a couple things that happen now that these items are inside of the container. If I reload the serial numbers tab, it shows me what container these barcodes are in. And if I click on this, it would just take me back to that content builder mode. If we look at the safety cable, let's refresh the quantity. Nothing really happens here because one thing that you'll notice on the shipping case item, when I set this up as serialized storage, content available is set to yes. So that means anything that I scan into one of these serialized storage barcodes is still going to show as available on schedules and in availability calculations, etc. Now, the reason you might want to do this, and this is a pretty big tip that I've been sharing with a lot of customers over the past few months, is you want to consider what is the item that you're going to be putting on a quote. So in this example, let's look at the items that we have right now. We have a shipping case, we have the wash light, and then we have a few other things that might go into the case. What is the item that we want to be the parent line on a quote, the thing that we're selling to a customer? In my opinion, it's going to be the wash light. I don't necessarily want to say, yes, I'm going to be selling you one VL2500 shipping case, and incidentally, it has 2 lights inside of it. I want to say, I'm selling you 4 or 6 or 8 of these VL2500 wash lights. So this is the item that I would want to put on the quote. And because I'm putting this item on the quote, I'm going to want to see the availability of this item based on when it's being used on other jobs, not necessarily if it's scanned inside of a case or not. So you can see that's why we have content available set to yes on this serialized storage item of the shipping case, because even if I scan something into it, I still want it to show, I want these items to show as available when I look at a schedule. So looking at the schedule here, we're just going to see we have 4 out of 4, even though 2 of them are technically inside of a case. Let's go create a new test quote so we can look at this idea of what item goes on the quote and how that works with scanning in and out. And we'll focus the rest of this webinar, I think, on kind of the scanning out and scanning back in process of containers. So we'll just call this a VL2500 rental. We'll just put in some arbitrary dates. And again, I'm not going to worry about any of this other information right now. All I want to do is just be able to put this item onto a quote so that we can scan it or create a pull sheet and then scan it in and out. So let's open our intelligent lighting. And I'm going to put 2 of these VL2500s onto the quote. And so notice my availability is still saying you're using 2 here, but that's fine. You're in the green and you have 2 left if you need it. Even if I go to confirm the quote, and if I were to create another quote and say that I need 2, it's only going to calculate availability based on the quantities that I'm using on the quote and not based on the quantities that are scanned inside of one of these shipping cases. Now that's a big difference between a serialized storage and a serialized package item. If I change this to a serialized package, content available gets set to no. And so anything that I've scanned into the container is not going to show as available because it's reserved inside of that container. And a lot of times you might do that for something like you might set up a serialized package on something like an amp rack. That might be something that has, let me see if I have one set up. I don't have one set up now, but for example, what's the item that you're putting on a quote? Probably the amp rack itself. Not each individual amplifier, but you're just going to drag over an amp rack and say, I'm putting 1 amp rack on this quote, and the customer doesn't necessarily need to know that that contains 2, 3, or 4 amps and processors. They just want to know that they're getting an amp rack. But remember, the serialized storage and the way that we're setting up this VL2500 wash is that we want to be able to put the light itself on the quote. And so that's kind of the difference there. And again, we talk about that a little bit more in the separate webinars for serialized storage and serialized packages. So if you want to learn a little bit more about that and how each of them work, I recommend watching those webinars. Let's look at a few things in terms of how this appears on the quote now and how it's going to appear when we create a pull sheet. So I'm going to generate a pull sheet out of this quote. And notice that we still just have the VL2500 wash sitting on the pull sheet. That's the only thing that's there. Now, one of the main purposes that you might want to set up container items like this, like the shipping case, is because once you've scanned items into a shipping case, those items will automatically scan out when I scan the shipping case's barcode. So when I'm on a prep screen and I scan 00314, which is the barcode on one of my shipping cases, it's automatically going to scan out 309, 308, and 4 of these lighting safety cables. So that's kind of the benefit of building these storage container items, is that you can build these storage containers before you even prep a job. They could be sitting in your warehouse for weeks or even months, but when it comes time to prep a job and we go to a prep screen, all you have to do is scan the barcode on the case, and it's going to scan out the wash lights, the safety cables, and everything, and put those on the manifest. Now let me show you one thing. Because this prep screen or this pull sheet only has the wash lights on it, look at what happens when I try to scan the case. It's asking me, are you sure you want to scan this because the item's not on the list? It is available during this period, but it's not on the list. So I'm going to get that prompt telling me that this item's not on the list. Now if I say accept and I let it scan, then it's going to scan out the case, it's going to scan out the wash lights that are inside of that case and the safety cables. But a lot of times it's really helpful to be able to see on your pull sheet every single one of those items that's supposed to go out when I'm scanning the wash lights out. And so one thing that we've done and showed a lot of customers is to go back to your VL2500 wash inventory item, and you could set this up in a way that it is a non-serialized model with accessories. And that means anytime I put this VL2500 wash onto a quote, I can have Flex automatically add other things to the quote. So it's not necessarily suggestions, these are things that are automatically going to add every single time I put this on a quote. So notice, since I set this inventory model up as non-serialized with accessories, I now have a little contents tab. Anything I put into this contents tab will be the things that automatically add to the quote when I put the 2500 on there. So I might say for each VL2500 wash, I want to send out 2 safety cables. So if I put 2 washes on the quote, it will send 4 safety cables. And then this is the really cool thing, is I can actually go and say that I want the shipping case to be included with the lights too. Because remember, this is going to be the parent line item. This is what we want the customer to see, and this is what they want them to know that they're getting and being charged for. But we might also want the shipping case to appear on the quote just so it can push over to the pull sheet and make your life a little bit easier when you're prepping. This one's a little bit more tricky. I'm going to put this in the contents or the accessories of the VL2500 wash, but it's not going to be a one-to-one relationship. For every 2 lights that I put on a quote, I only need 1 case. So if I put 4 lights on a quote, I only need 2 cases to go out. So in this scenario, we're going to say for each 1 wash light, we're going to put 0.5 cases onto the quote. Now let me show you how this works. Let's go back and remove this from the quote, and I'll also remove it from the pull sheet, so I'll check both boxes. And I just want to re-add it so you can see what happens now when I add the wash light now that I've added those accessories. So now it's going to send 4 safety cables and the 1 shipping case. If I change this to 4, then the math will automatically recalculate. And so let's update the pull sheet now. so that these items can show up on our pull sheet. And then when we go to the prep screen, now I can scan out that case. And what's going to happen now is it's not going to give me the prompt telling me that it's not on the list, because it is on the list now. And it's going to scan out the case, and it's going to scan out all of the contents that were inside of the case. So looking at the manifest, it shows the case as the parent item with all of the items that are inside of it. So that's the scan out, and a lot of you are probably already familiar with this. When you scan the case out, it automatically scans all of the items that are inside of it. But let's look at a few tips for the scanning in process. This works a little bit differently, and for a couple reasons. Let's look at those reasons right now. If we look at the inventory item settings for the shipping, or the shipping case is what we called it, we'll also see that contents permanent is set to no. What that means is that when I scan something into it, it does not mark it as permanent. And Flex knows that any item that isn't permanent means that it could very well come out of that case and go back in a different case, or come back outside of the case. There's any number of reasons that that might not come back in this exact same case. And if something is not marked as permanent, when I scan this case back in, then non-permanent items will not be scanned in automatically. So let's look at how this works. And I'm going to go to the manifest to do this so that we can visually see what it looks like when we're scanning it in. So if I go to the return screen, and if I scan 00314, then what's going to happen is it's only going to return the shipping case. I would still have to scan each of the individual items inside of it. Now there's a few ways to look at this, and this is where I want to share a few tips. When I worked in a warehouse, we would typically scan the case. We would scan each item individually as a scan in, or you could do the same thing on the free scan in page. But we would scan everything in individually. And then we would go through and reopen each of the cases in Content Builder mode and rebuild the cases. That's not incredibly difficult because you'll just return everything quickly. All of the cases are already open, so you can just quickly scan the case barcode. And this is one tip that a lot of people don't know. If you scan a case barcode from your calendar screen, it automatically will open up and you can go to that Content Builder mode. So it's really easy to just scan that case barcode to enter Content Builder mode and then scan the items that are currently sitting in that case. Now what I've learned from a few of our customers is that they've been able to bypass having to double scan everything. And let me show you how you can do that. Before we do that, actually, I just want to show one more setting in our inventory settings. This is what we call the explode containers setting. Basically, this means if this is set to yes, and when I scan 00314, it's automatically going to evacuate all of the items that are inside of it. If this is set to no, and I scan 00314 on the return, then it's still going to keep all of these items inside of the case. It's not going to return these items, but all of those items will still show as inside of the case until I scan in each of these items. Then it would remove itself from the case. So there's just two ways of looking at it. The explode containers will just automatically remove everything immediately, or if you have that set to no, then as soon as you scan in each item, then it removes it. I'm going to keep that set to yes, and let's just look at what happens. I'm going to scan in 314. Oops, I'm on the prep, my mistake. Let's go to the return. And so it only returns the shipping case. That's back in our available inventory, but it didn't return any of the other items. And if we refresh our Content Builder screen, then we can see everything has been removed automatically. Now this is where one of our tips comes in. And this is something I've learned from a few of our customers. Instead of having to go through and scan in every single item and then go back and rebuild the container, I could actually just come in here and start rebuilding the container. So let's say that this one just happened to come back with all of the same items it went out with. And when I scan in 00308 and 00309, two things happen. Number one, it rebuilds these items into this container. And so if I go back and look at my serial numbers, it's showing those ones inside of that container. But what it also does, and if I refresh, it actually returns those items from the job that they were out on too. And so that just kind of eliminates the middle step of having to scan everything in first and then go back and rebuild. I've seen a lot of our customers that will just go and start rebuilding, and as they scan an item into a container, it will also just return it to its job. It will give you, that's maybe the one downside, and this is something that we might be looking at internally here at Flex. It does give you a recovery scan log instead of just a simple return. And so if that's something that you don't want to see, then you'll probably still want to use the traditional method of just scanning everything in on a return screen or in the free scan in and then going back to rebuild. But if that recovery doesn't bother you at this point, then you could certainly just use the shortcut and start rebuilding to have it return items. And so those are just a few tips that we wanted to share in terms of container building. Again, we do have quite a few other webinars on this and similar subjects. If you're looking for more in terms of packages like virtual packages, we have a couple good webinars on that. And if you're looking for a little bit more detail about what serialized storage is versus serialized packages and free pick containers, then we also have some separate webinars on that as well. So I definitely recommend checking those out if you need a little bit more information. But I hope this webinar was able to give you some good information and some tips on how you can manage these containers, and maybe you hopefully learned something a little bit new about how you can scan things in and out and deal with content building and things like that. If you have any questions about this, or if you want to share any of your best practices and tips and tricks, I definitely recommend going to our forum. That's just at forum.flexrentalsolutions.com, and you can find this specific webinar posted in the webinars board, so you can send a reply to this specific topic and talk about any of the questions or tips and tricks that you have. If you're having any issues, more technical in nature, that you need some help with, then we ask that you email support@flexrentalsolutions.com.